Since I've started my channel, I've created a few videos talking about AI, the skills that we need to be building, how this technology is reshaping how we work, how different professionals are seeing the risks and opportunities. And one of the opportunities that has come out again and again in the news and in the conversations that I've had with professionals and experts in their field is the notion of entrepreneurship. This is a topic that's super interesting because a lot of the articles that I'm seeing out there are saying that this is the time when we're gonna see a lot more millionaires, billionaires, and maybe even trillionaires being built from the new AI technology and all the new things that that's bringing into the economy. I'm so excited for today's conversation. I sit down with Dr. Charis Asante, who is an assistant professor at the University of Delaware. In this conversation, we talk through why entrepreneurship matters more than ever, what drives people to pursue work arrangements outside of traditional employment, and how concepts of autonomy, agency, and purpose are driving the decisions that we're making around our careers today. So let's dive in. To get us started, Charis, can you talk to me a little bit about how you ended up in academia? What pulled you into studying work and specifically entrepreneurship?
Yeah, so it's a bit of a long-winded path, but I think there's that kind of person career fit. So growing up, I've always been curious, asking questions, been super interested in understanding things. I like to call it just pursuing truth. And the people I interacted with, faculty, teachers, and all the way up through college would suggest, study more, study more, study more. And so that's really the main driver, just my curiosity to learn and understand the world a bit more. Specifically about entrepreneurship, I think it really was a culminating effect of one, being from Ghana and learning about the population boom that is yet to happen. It's imminent, right? There's a huge growing youth population in Africa. What are they going to do when there's also a looming crisis of unemployment? So entrepreneurship becomes very important on the top of mind concept. So I fast forward, I go to Korea, and entrepreneurship was also very important in how Korea became an advanced economy. And so all of these things are going around at the time when I am interested to pursue just further exploration of knowledge. And I think I combine those and I'm like, okay, this is sort of the path. Entrepreneurship as a field is interesting. Not to mention at Syracuse, where you and I both did our PhD, I met some really cool people doing research on entrepreneurship. So all of those come together and kind of just pull me towards academia and research and entrepreneurship.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to unpack there. Like, I'm specifically interested in like the growing population there versus like what you see in other places, like in America, where we have fewer people having children, and so it's kind of a shrinking youth population. So
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
what do you think about that?
So culturally, I think the African society is very relational, community based.
Yeah.
And so the growing population is not necessarily a surprise. And it's been actually positioned, I think, rightfully so, as an opportunity, right? Because you could also see it as a problem, right? It's like, okay, you have more mouths to feed, you need to build newer structures to support all of these people. So the positioning matters. And when we look at the more advanced societies, like you mentioned with the US, but if you look further to like Asia, right, we have a looming population crisis.
Yes.
And there too, I think it's all about the positioning. You make do with what you have. I haven't studied that deeply enough about what governments and NGOs are doing to solve the problem. I've heard people saying, well, this is why we need robotics, right? We can actually now support people to live longer, healthier lives, and then have robotics kind of cater for what is missing in terms of labor. That's one person's reality. That seems to be a doable solution. But in the African context, what I've seen predominantly is positioning this population boom as an opportunity, uh, perhaps even to provide this labor to these other markets, right, in ways that can support. Um, I haven't seen it resolved yet because it's still, we're in that experience right now,
Yeah.
right, where the population is booming and unemployment is either at the same level or increasing. So
Hmm.
what do you do about that? And entrepreneurship has always been, oh, this is the one way to go. This is the one way to go. So I don't know what we learned from one other's camp, each other's camp relating to entrepreneurship, relating to the boom. Um, but I think positioning is really what I see to be the most important thing.
I love that. And seeing it as an opportunity versus a crisis, like you're saying, or focusing on the negative, how many more mouths do we have to feed? And like seeing it as a problem, I think that is a great way to look at it. And I also just have a question in terms of like within your family structure, right? Like, did you see entrepreneurship as like common, or again, like I'm just trying to pull out the threads of where this might have come from. Maybe it
Yeah,
was school, but there's likely some family or friend ties there too. I don't know. Can you talk a little?
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So I did have some familial relation to entrepreneurship. My dad, when we were growing up, he was a full-time pastor. So he used to pastor a church, but then he had a beverage company
Mm.
where he created actually a recipe for a drink, and he trademarked it so he wouldn't give the secret out.
Wow.
Um, and I remember have very distinct memories growing up where I would help prepare the thing, and then we would fill the bottles up. We would go and serve it at weddings, at communion services, for parties and such. And later, and we're going to talk about this, but this is really what hybrid entrepreneurship is.
Yeah.
Later, when I come to study it, I realize, oh, this has been part of my family growing up. Um, and yeah, it's not unique to him. There were several other people engaged in just business. What's interesting is in Ghana, I think there was also a process of, um, so people would, the perception of what business was kind of changed, where
Mhm.
initially it was seen as people just taking advantage of others. So it was very in a negative light. And it kind of changed where now it became this, okay, we're actually contributing to society in meaningful ways. And now it's also changed to this is our saving grace. Again, back to what I mentioned earlier with the population crisis. It's like, okay, now we actually want people to be entrepreneurial because they can't depend on the job market necessarily. Right?
Yeah.
So that was also interesting seeing that change. Now it's more attractive and people gravitate towards it
Yeah.
more.
No, that's super interesting. And I do want to get into hybrid entrepreneurship, but another interesting part of your bio is like how you went to study to Korea. Like what led you there? What did you learn? What did you come back with from
Yeah.
that experience?
Yeah, so Korea was not part of my plans. I had actually started university in Ghana,
Mhm.
um, and there was an opportunity came through my high school in Ghana. But what really made me take this opportunity to go to Korea was my dad had studied in Korea too, so he was a bit familiar with Korea, the landscape, and I was always interested in technology. Korea was known to be this technological powerhouse, so he really encouraged me to go. I say encouraged, but it's really forced me to go. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, and I think it was a decision that he made for me, with me, however you want to put it. And Korea was, uh, so I think really interesting. Again, going back to this whole, I'm coming from Ghana, we're on this emerging economy path. Korea had 40, 30 years prior to when I got there, had gone through a similar kind of emerging economy
Entrepreneurship.
path, right? So it felt exactly, it felt it felt very timely for me to be in a place and I could see, oh, this is how Ghana can become. right? So that was my milieu. That's really what I was immersed in Korea.
Yeah.
I came away from Korea feeling okay, it is possible through a combination of government policies, but also people's entrepreneurial um, endeavors to really shift a country's economic trajectory.
Yeah. Yeah, that's wild, and it's super interesting how you're like how your dad was shaping all these things where you saw him as an entrepreneur on the side on top of his main pastor, career or path, right? And then
Right.
you're taking all these things from your dad. Did you know any Korean before going out there, like with your dad going there? Or did you have to learn it? Did you learn on
A little bit, but not enough to do any serious thing. So he would, I think he learned how to say things like, "Oh, I'm lost" to the police. This is
Yeah.
something like I can't find my way, and the police are super helpful. Or something like, "Hey, can you please give me more rice?" When he goes to a restaurant, that's like one of the things he
The
learned.
important, yeah,
The important stuff, but
the important stuff.
right, right, yeah. Korea's great. Korea's wonderful. I always encourage people to visit.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I love it. Okay, so let's dig into like the actual meat of this conversation. So, talk to
Mm.
me about what is hybrid entrepreneurship, like if you were to define it, and then like kind of a follow-up is why would someone choose hybrid entrepreneurship versus going full in on a business or staying in their traditional job?
Yeah, so hybrid entrepreneurship is simultaneous combination of a full-time work job, where there's a salary, there's a contract, so it's full-time. That and some kind of venturing, so a business, and increasingly people are allowing this venturing to include things like side gigs and
Yeah.
micro tasks and whatnot. But that's the fundamental idea. You combine it simultaneously at the same time. And why people do it in the literature, we like to talk about three main categories of rationales. So the first would be something like supplementing your income. So you could
Mm,
have a job, but the income is not enough. So you need to supplement it. So then you resort to some kind of venturing. So the idea there is your income from your job has a ceiling. You can't necessarily increase it, maybe because it's contingent on the time you spend or on your expertise or on some other factor. But with venturing, you can theoretically have a limitless upper bound, theoretically, right? So the more customers you get, well, the more money you might get. So there's this notion that you can supplement your income. The second rationale is, well, there are certain things people can't derive necessarily from their jobs that they can get from business. And these things are non-monetary. So things like autonomy, um, recognition, uh, prestige, maybe even leisure activities that you can't necessarily perform. So one of my really interesting participants started as a medical doctor, a nightclub, and he derives a lot of weird pleasure from that he's unable to, rightfully so, derive
right.
from his right job as a medical doctor. And then lastly, there's this notion that people will engage in hybrid entrepreneurship as a way to incrementally transition to full-time entrepreneurship because they can use hybrid entrepreneurship as a test bed. So a way to test the waters and see, okay, is this really a right move for me? Should I quit? Well, don't just quit your job. Try hybrid, and then based on your insights, either quit or go back or stay as hybrid. So
Mhm.
those are the three main theoretical rationales we like to proffer for why people engage in hybrid entrepreneurship.
Do you have a sense of like how many people engage in hybrid entrepreneurship? Like, is there a percentage of the population that tends to do these sort of arrangements?
There are, and so it's also we don't have data across consistent data across all countries, which makes it a bit
Mhm.
difficult to make a claim like that. But I think so far the most advanced data sets we have are in the EU,
Mm,
and certain countries have higher prevalence of hybrid entrepreneurship than others. But globally, I think our calculations set it at somewhere between 35 to the a little bit over 50% mark. Again, accounting for the fact that we don't have consistent data throughout. So
Yeah.
it's not this obscure thing people don't do, but it's also not the majority of everyone. Like 90% of people are engaged in hybrid entrepreneurship. So these are some statistics to show why it's important
Wow.
to really pay attention to this phenomenon.
So most companies, you're saying out of all the companies that get started, most of them are started with an entrepreneur staying on their full-time job just to test the water, like you're saying.
The reasoning could be different, right? It could be to test waters. It could
It
be
could be.
because just exactly, but
Okay,
it is
okay.
started in hybrid mode.
Wow. That's super interesting. Are there like well-known companies that like are some of the big companies that started as this hybrid arrangement?
Yeah. So one of my favorite examples is actually Steve Wozniak, co-founder of Apple,
Mm,
already was at Hewlett Packard, I think, when they
okay.
started Apple with Steve Jobs. eBay is another interesting example. So Omar Pierre, I think, Omidyar Pierre, I think is his name. I may be butchering it. But this is interesting because it's also on a documentary you can see. He was an employee, a software engineer at General Magic. General Magic is also an interesting case for a very different reason. But he was on there while he started eBay, right? So he had his software engineering job, starts eBay on the side, actually talks a bit about it during a really nice documentary you can go watch, freely available on YouTube, I think.
Okay.
And then several other examples. My dad, but his company wasn't famous, so
Yeah. No, yeah.
yeah,
But it's a great example. It's a great
it
example.
is, it is, it is.
Is it still a company or is he no
No,
longer?
no, Shalomba is defunct now, but we still have the recipe, so we'll see what we do with that
Oh my God.
familial legacy.
I
Yeah,
love it. I think this is your time to shine and take that into, yeah, bring it to the US,
we'll
start it
see,
here.
we'll see.
Maybe it'll pop off here with the right
All right,
marketing, the right staff.
yeah.
That's great. I love it. Well, you mentioned your lit review. I'm super interested in that because the literature review, takes a lot of time. And so you really dug deep on all the hybrid entrepreneurship literature that is out there. Other than that fact about most companies being started in that hybrid entrepreneurship mode, was there any other surprising thing that you found doing that literature review?
Um, so there's a lot of insights. I think what struck me, and this may not be so much about the phenomenon, or maybe it is, but what struck me was just how siloed the conversation about hybrid entrepreneurship is, even within academia. It may not be a surprise actually, but the people talking about it from the perspective of, say, only medical doctors or pharmacists, and others talking about it from the perspective of lawyers, and others talking about it from the perspective of side gigs, but and using different terminologies to refer to the same thing. And when we did our literature review, which we're still on it, it just made sense to bring all of those conversations together so we can really synthesize them. That's the first thing that really struck us, me and my co-author, Joaquin Sestino. Um, I think in terms of the phenomenon itself, what is interesting is there's a lot of nuance. So we've seen a lot of popular media where people say, okay, should you encourage your employees to be hybrid entrepreneurs, right? And a lot of them will take either stance. Yes, encourage them because it increases, for example, their ability to be innovative. They come in with fresh ideas. And then some will say, no, it really challenges their commitment to you, right?
Mhm.
But what we're seeing is it's not either or, it's actually both and it
Mm.
depends on how supportive you are. So it'd be this notion of organizational resource support, um, and how they manage the two. So the relation between the two. And we don't have terms for this actually. So this is something I hope to convince my co-author for us to really include. this idea of hybridity ratios, how the two fit and interact, right? So that a manager, for example, could better manage a hybrid employee, not give them so much autonomy that they feel like, okay, maybe I should start my own business, but also not stifle them of the autonomy to actually want to go start their own business, right? So there's this really nuanced relationality that I think we still don't quite know yet. And that's what our review will hopefully enlighten for future research to focus on and conduct some studies on that.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And I think right now, especially with AI, like we were just talking about this before, we hit record, but um now there's so much out there to say like, oh, AI is going to generate the most millionaires and billionaires of all time. And like there's so much
Yeah.
opportunity. And like I mean, I am seeing it more and more now with like, I mean, I work with developers all the time, but like these people with some technical skills, if they have a problem, like they're able to now accelerate maybe the development of different things and maybe even people without coding ability. Like there's a lot out there about like, oh, you can now start whatever idea you had or app or website or whatever without
Mhm.
knowing code. So do you think this is going to be like this idea of supporting hybridity? Like, I just think it's going to become way more prominent now more than ever. It's not that it wasn't there before, but like now it's like really going to be a problem if companies aren't supporting their employees.
Absolutely, absolutely. So that's one thing we have seen. Actually, so that's a good point. In our literature review, there are only a few papers that focus on how technology is shaping hybrid entrepreneurship as a phenomenon. However, like you're pointing out, clearly
Mhm.
it should shape it, right? And so we're calling for more of that because, like you're saying, and I completely agree, it is going to become more of a concern from a managerial perspective or even an organizational perspective when you have employees doing things at their own time
Yeah.
or even with company time,
Yeah.
um, based on the tools they have. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I'll be interested to see what else you dig into around that topic. But one other pressing question that I had too is like, as you're looking into entrepreneurship, hybrid entrepreneurship, like, is there a single biggest myth that you know about entrepreneurship? Or like, yeah, like there's a lot that people talk about when it comes to starting your own business. What's the biggest myth out there?
Yeah. So I think that is the biggest myth that entrepreneurship is equal to starting your own business. And
Mm,
so most people define entrepreneurship as the process of starting, if someone starts their own business, they're an entrepreneur. But really, when we think about entrepreneurship, it's about identifying opportunities and exploiting them. And you may start a new business, but you may also restructure processes within an existing business. For example, you haven't started a new business, but you've created the conditions for new organization or economic activity within an existing business. Um, and it doesn't even have to be an economic entity that you end up creating. So, for example, nonprofits, they create new relations between resources. They may not necessarily generate new economic activity, but they may generate political activity, and we still classify that entrepreneurially. Right? And
mm,
so I think that's a big myth that we continue to dispel in our classrooms through research, because it's important because we want people to galvanize and direct their entrepreneurial activity to where society needs it the most, not just to building economic entities, which is important, but society needs a lot of value in all sorts of areas, and entrepreneurship is a way to direct those energies to those places.
wow. Wow. Here I am walking into that trap of starting your own business. Okay, so you said it was identifying opportunities and then
Right. And exploiting them.
exploiting
Ex-
them, creating
Exploiting
value,
them meaning,
exploiting.
yes, to create value, exactly. So you reorganize the relationship
Mm,
between some resources you identify or some kind of network between people, And that's really where the value gets created because you've reorganized a certain system. You may eliminate waste, you may increase. So then the value, and there are different kinds of value. We also like to think about um, economic values, just one kind of value, money, aka money. There's also harmony, which is a social kind of value. There's environmental, and I can share a framework I really like to refer to about different kinds of value by, I believe the name is Lakios, but I can share it after we chat about different
Yeah.
kinds of value. Very holistic perspective that I think is very important.
I'd love that. Yeah, if you have any resources or like more, yeah, further readings around that, that's super interesting. And now this kind of brings me to a question too of like, okay, so if you're saying, it's entrepreneurship is not the same as starting your own business or, um, going off and creating something. It's more about the opportunities. So then I'm thinking there's probably a lot more entrepreneurship like in the workplace than we actually realize, right? Like there's people that are creating value, identifying opportunities and maybe exploiting that value within existing organizations or even outside of that. But like, do you have any insight as to like what are the conditions that lead to increased entrepreneurship? Like, is that something that,
Mm,
companies could start like creating the conditions that would then maybe make workers or whatever a little bit more productive, right? Is there
yeah.
research about that?
So that's not my focus area, to be just honest there. But there's research on intrapreneurship, which is exactly what you're talking
Mhm.
about. So intrapreneurship with an I, where we focus on what are the conditions, the processes and outcomes of entrepreneurship within existing organizations.
Okay.
I haven't really looked at that
Yeah.
literature much, but I will say that there is research also on something we call the entrepreneurial orientation. The
Mm.
entrepreneurial orientation, which is how it's like your
Individually, like
entrepreneurial bent.
okay.
So it exists at the individual level, but it also, I've seen some scholars really trying to conceptualize it for the firm level,
Hmm.
right? So at the individual level, that's very well established. And we look at things like proactivity, for example, right? So the more proactive someone is, the higher their entrepreneurial orientation, risk taking, innovativeness, assertiveness. And it's not assertiveness, I think it's something like aggression. I forget what the
Hmm.
specific, and I should know this off the top of my head. But entrepreneurial orientation has these individual dimensions related to kind of
Okay.
constitute this. But I mention this because you could think of entrepreneurial orientation at the firm level, right? So how entrepreneurial is the firm? Because that environment is what is going to allow individual employees to act favorably. So if the environment is supportive, then they can be supported. It's like riding a wave versus going
Hmm.
against it. Right? So if you're the only entrepreneurial person in a firm that is just so traditional, it's not proactive, it's not innovative, it doesn't like to think about taking risks, you're going to be going against the wave a lot, right? And that's not going to obviously result in huge value creation.
Right.
It could, but likely not to. So that's what I would look at.
Harder. Yeah. Okay.
Exactly, exactly. Um,
Okay. Well, that's
yeah,
that's super interesting. Yeah, I'll probably be digging into these dimensions a little bit more because that just seems super interesting. But I kind of want to go back to your study on hybrid entrepreneurship with medical doctors in Ghana. That's
yeah.
a super niche context. So I'm
Mhm.
just curious, what did that context teach you? And especially about like how these people are building something on the side or how they're being entrepreneurial on the side while still holding down their full-time job as medical doctors. Like that seems like those
Yes.
two things are kind of at odds with each other. So I'm just, yeah, what are the takeaways?
Right. So it is a very interesting context, and I am super appreciative of all the participants who gave their time. As you can imagine, right? Being medical doctors, they obviously need to put their times to serve and keep people healthy and all that. Um, I think one of the key insights was this notion of leveraging your professional acumen to build businesses, right? So we've known this, that people build based on the networks they have, right? In entrepreneurship, right? If you're well connected, you can build better businesses, access resources and such. But here, what we're seeing is because they're doctors and because doctors are perceived really highly in the Ghanaian society, that confers on them some legitimacy that they then take advantage of to transfer to their firms, which they build and then serve. So they're doctors, and so they're better positioned to sell, for example, to um, their customers. Even with the doctor who started the nightclub, for example,
Right.
right? It was still a value add to have a doctor serving you alcoholic drinks because then they could tell you, okay, it is time. You shouldn't take any more. No,
Oh,
but I want my next drink. Hey, I'm a doctor. Trust me, right? And
trust
he
me,
actually
there's a
had,
lot of stuff at that one.
right.
Oh my God.
And he actually did have people insult him at the bar, not knowing he was a doctor, and then come later to the hospital to meet him as a doctor. Right? And obviously, that results in a bonding. You have a customer for life, but the customer will listen to you for life as well, right? So that
Oh,
legitimacy confirmed was really interesting. And so you can think about when that is not the case for certain professionals, right? And we can think about different professions. So that's sort of future research. Or do all professions confer this legitimacy in all places, right? So one of my participants had been spending time in both Ghana and Nigeria, as well as other places, but observed that in Nigeria, the perception of doctors is not as positive as it is in Ghana.
oh
So
wow.
what would it mean for docpreneurs, which is what I call them, to operate in a context like Nigeria? They would have to obviously build a lot more trust with
Mhm.
the people that they serve than they had to do in Ghana. That was like the first big takeaway. Um, a second interesting thing that I found that I'm thinking a lot more about is this notion of substitutability. So, in the medical field, what I saw is that many times their work is organized around groups, right? And so you can have a group of surgeons or medical officers, these are different ranks, residents, working at the same ward so that when one is not present, the work doesn't stop. Work still continues because they work as a team. And so that helps them obviously to build their simultaneous businesses, right? Remember, it's at the same time. But you don't have this substitutability, this team group-based work in all professions. So then the question was, how can other professions build this team-based work organization into their processes so it can enable people to replace each other so they can attend to other tasks. Now, in my case, the tasks are building your side businesses, but you can imagine these tasks could be things like childcare, right? Which
Mhm.
is a really important non-work based activity that people engage in order to keep life going, right? So this notion of substitutability was interesting for me. We saw that particularly with residents in pathology. They work a lot in groups. One finishes something, passes it on, and they're being trained around the same sort of knowledge basis. They keep up to date with what each other is doing. So how can you really build that into an organization, right? To go back to how you can manage hybrid entrepreneurs, well, it's not just the individual. Think more about the way your work is organized, and that might give you a lot more leeway, right? They're more satisfied. You get more work out of them, but you also get work done. You're not losing when someone is out. So.
Yeah. No, that's super interesting. I'm also curious too, like, so both of these notions are interesting. Thinking about how to substitute other people for the skills that you're needing as you build out, this entrepreneurship path. But like, I
Yeah.
also go back, like, does that work across the examples that you looked at? Like, what are some of the examples of things that these doctorpreneurs, is that what you're calling them? Doctorpreneurs are building.
Entrepreneurs, yeah.
Doctrineurs, okay. So what are some examples of the things? Because we got the bar example, which still to me is baffling. Like, because you would think those things are counterintuitive. Like you, as a bartender, you'd want to sell more drinks, but you're saying maybe they trusted the doctor with his professional opinion, so they're likely to go there, so they know they're taken care
Right,
of in that bar
right,
versus another bar where they could just be,
right.
they wouldn't be cut off. So it kind of makes sense. It's like it's hard to make sense of it, but it makes sense, right? What are other
Yeah.
examples that you saw out there, and like, did you see that substitution possible across the board, or
Mm.
which ones seem to be doing it better than others, I guess, in the study that you worked on?
Yeah. So the side businesses that they were engaged in was very varied, and I did this on purpose so I could have, something a
Right.
bit more generalizable. Yeah, a huge range. So the nightclub owner is obviously my favorite example.
Yeah.
Uh, but there were other examples of people that started a fast food joint, for example.
Okay.
Right. So broadly, for analytical purposes, I like to divide them into health-related ventures and then non-health related ventures.
Mhm.
So the health-related ventures, some people also started private clinics, for example,
Okay.
um, or home care services, where they come and take care of the elderly, or provide some kind of on-demand healthcare services to people. And then the non-healthcare is obviously the nightclub example. You have people starting fast food joints, people selling handbags, right?
Mm.
And they would sell the handbags to colleagues in the hospital, but also to patients, right? And
Wow.
then also advertise them on Instagram, where they show that they're a doctor and
Mm.
they're selling handbags. And obviously, you would trust this more than just a random person selling handbags. Like there's just an extra level of legitimacy. And several other examples, makeup, which is interesting because medical doctors tend to not put on makeup while they're at work. So there's a really interesting identity element there. So several examples. To your second question about the substitutability, there's a hierarchy. So this profession has a hierarchy. You enter after medical school as um, a house officer, where it's sort of a probational
Mhm.
kind of 2 year period where you have a license, but it's temporary. Then you become a medical officer, then you can practice without supervision. Senior medical officer, you can become a resident where you get trained on something a bit more specific. And then you can become a specialist after that, and a consultant, right? So there's a hierarchy. And as you can imagine, at the lower rungs of this hierarchy, uh, you don't have autonomy. You don't have a say as to when you work, who
Mhm.
you work with, right? Your name is just put there on
Yeah.
on the roster, and you just show up. Excessive amounts of time that you spend. So there, substitutability is minimal, if at all, present. But as you rise higher in the ranks, your substitutability increases in tandem with your autonomy over your time, over um, when you work. Um, and then, of course, even at the highest level, you're deciding who works where, right? So there you have a lot more latitude. Um, so there you're not concerned about substitutability. You're probably delegating at the
Mhm.
really highest rungs of the ladder.
I was thinking about it, I think backwards, where I was thinking like it would be higher at the lower level, but you're saying that as you rise in the ranks, you just have more autonomy, so that increases your ability to substitute, um, pull in other people, maybe delegation. Is that do those things go hand in hand, like delegating tasks working with others, or
Delegation,
yeah,
definitely. Delegating, definitely. So that's a good point about the fact that there's a lot more of you
yeah,
with general skills, so you might be able to substitute more. That would make sense. The only limiting factor here is they don't have autonomy.
yeah.
Right? They've been put on the roster to go there at a certain time to work. So, for
Specific
example,
task.
one
Yeah.
quote that I remember specifically is, "We're like robots," right?
Mm.
So you're like a robot, and yeah, you could replace a robot with another robot, but you don't want to because you want this robot to eventually be trained to become, for lack of a better word, a human being, right? Where they get to choose, right?
Okay.
So that would be expected, but within the system where the goal is to train so people are better equipped, um, doctors, better doctors, you don't want to substitute them too early. But
Yeah.
you can easily do that when they're specialists. This is where I saw the substitution actually taking place when they're not specialists, sorry, the residents. So
Mm.
they've been doctors for a few years, for several years. They're being trained on something specific, right, in a cohort basis also. So they have a lot more autonomy, but not enough to delegate.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
so they can take a quick, hey, cover for me, which is, I also have that in my data. Cover for me. I need to go get flour and whatever for my cake, which I need to deliver in 24 hours.
Mm.
You couldn't do that as a house officer. If you were caught, that would be very damaging
Mm.
because there you're new, right? You're still learning,
Yeah.
and there's this high expectation for you to just do what you're told
In the box. Yeah, you have to
in
stay
the
in the
box.
box, in your lane.
Right.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. So that's
Yeah.
an interesting observation that would happen, but
Yeah.
the dynamics of the system kind of shifted a little bit.
It. Okay, so we're talking a little bit about autonomy, and one of the questions I have is, right now a lot of the AI conversation is around efficiency and automation, right? We want to make things
Mm,
more productive. We want to be more efficient. We want to automate this, read my email. But you specifically, your work looks at agency. So as we see AI become more embedded in our workplace and in our lives, what do you think, like, what are you most concerned about? Anything related to, back to the question about human agency? Like, have you thought about that at all? Or, yeah, what are your takes there?
yeah, I think I worry about um, atrophy. I've been thinking a lot about, okay, so I'm concerned AI is doing this, but really, what am I genuinely concerned about? And I've tried to narrow it down. I think it's really about atrophy. Um, Atrophy being your inability to do something after the support has been taken away. Or, right, so that's really what I'm concerned about. Is there evidence for this? Um, I haven't delved into the research. Right? I've read some lit reviews here and there that suggest that people have varying atrophy levels. I've also read some research that suggests that people can regain their metacognitive skills after it's been atrophied. So, but that's what I'm concerned about. And just to say a little bit more, the reason atrophy comes into play is because these tools, these AI tools, LLM systems, and all that become cognitive artifacts. So we use them to support our cognition. So scaffolds, if you might think of that as a, you know, scaffold something, and they're mostly cognitive activities.
Mhm.
Um, so it's interesting in the workplace. I haven't thought a lot about the workplace, but I've thought a lot about the school place, right? The
Mhm.
classroom, because
Yeah.
that's where I've become embedded in for quite some time. So it'll be interesting to see how this might change or shift in light of the workplace. But in the school place, similar to our previous discussion around house officers and specialists, house officers might be our students here. You're still learning the frames of mind. You're still learning the concepts to use. You're still learning the content that you then use to practice as a worker, let's say. School doesn't equip us with all of what we need, and so even as a worker, you still learn. So that might be our middle kind of run here. Now, if you use scaffolds while you're learning, or they extend your ability, what happens when those are taken away? That's my real concern. Um, uh, yeah, and I think this is why we need a bit more research on really what are there limits to neuroplasticity. I like the concept a lot of neuroplasticity, the fact that the brain, the mind, is not this fixed
Right.
network, right? We can grow, we can develop, we can regain, we can expand. So I like that a lot, and I wonder what that means for lost skills,
Yeah.
especially when we're following a developmental path, right? But
Yeah.
yeah, if I had to boil down really what I'm concerned about, it would be one would be atrophy
Yeah.
of our cognitive skills.
Yeah. I think so too. And
Um,
I was chatting with so I was chatting with Mike Dunn, who you know, but part of the conversation that I had with him was around this issue of like what are we losing? And I think the way you put it makes a lot of sense. And I particularly like go back to the example of like reading and writing. So for the PhD program, you know, for people who go on to graduate school, they have to do a lot of reading, comprehension, um, discussions, and then writing, right? And so reading
yes.
and writing are two very basic skills that, you know, people think they can write and they could read, but like when you think about it at a graduate level or at a PhD level, like it takes a specific skill, right? You're not just reading a
Mm,
book for fun, but you know, you're trying to comprehend very complex concepts or, yeah, viewpoints. And so, like, that's what worries me that we're kind of, even with these basic skills, like, I I taught news writing at University of Wyoming, and I just realized like how unprepared sophomore college students are to write basic essays or to write like two-page, you know, blog posts or something like that. Like
yeah.
it's mind-boggling how like unprepared they are, and that was 10 years ago when I was teaching. Um,
Mm,
looking at it now, I worry like it's only gonna get worse, right? Like
yes, yes,
that's
yeah.
like that's one of the things that I am concerned about. Like I recall when ChatGPT, like the public version just came out, we were actually in a reading group. I don't know if you remember, but like we started tinkering with ChatGPT when it came out in 2023, and actually you came to a group chat when we were doing the reading group, and you were like, here's ChatGPT, here's how you could summarize it, and like I think we started playing with it, and I look
Mm,
back at it now, like so the people in grad programs today, or even undergrads, right? Like they're going to ChatGPT for their summaries, or they're going to get help to write. And so I agree that this is maybe like my biggest concern is that we lose some of those basic skills going forward.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I've been teaching for the past, what, 2 years. I've
Yeah.
seen some of that. Um, the worst example is, and I won't say where this happened, but I had a student ask ChatGPT to spell connections, spell it
No.
out. Like, yes,
No.
write it in our class. No, I was not sure what was happening. And this was probably a sophomore or something. So, and so
Yeah.
we see this and we're like, what is happening? What are we losing? But if you
Yeah.
look at it from the organizational perspective, the disconnect, to your point about the focus on efficiency and automation, the focus is, oh, this tool is helping us get work done, right? And
Faster.
they're looking
Yeah.
at how quick it, but how there's a gap, right? And so I think my hope is going back to this whole idea of reframing things as opportunities. There's an opportunity to to reconnect those two in a way that clearly aligns the interest of organizations, the well-being of students, one, but also equip students to better leverage these tools, right? Because we also don't want a situation where our students are just so oblivious of tools. These
Yeah.
are tools, right, and systems that we use. And I think that's the challenge for us going forward. I'm optimistic, though, that the institutions of learning, all the way from, elementary all through higher ed, will not reinvent. I don't think reinvention is the goal, but realign our
Mhm.
our goals in terms of the learning outcomes and such, and increasingly draw organizations to also adapt with that, right? Yeah, I'm increasingly hopeful of that. And one reason I'm hopeful is just the goals we have for these systems are unrealistic. That's
Yeah.
one thing I'm increasingly convinced about, open to being convinced otherwise. But
Mhm.
I'm always reminded of, you will remember this, Ackerman had this socio-technical gap, this idea that we want our technologies to
Yeah.
achieve this for us, but socially we can also, or am I having it backwards? So there's always going to be a gap between what technologies can promise and what socially
Accessibility.
we need,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
There's a socio-technical gap, and I don't see it ever going away, for various reasons, right? So
Yeah.
that for me signals an opportunity. But yeah, I do worry about atrophy, as well as just well-being at work, right? If you don't have agency, actually, let me say it this way: agency is an important aspect of well-being at work. To
Mhm.
feel like you have ownership of the thing that you create,
Mhm.
which people don't think about, but if all you
Yeah.
create is through some system and you don't have a huge sense of ownership,
Mhm.
that doesn't do well for your well-being at work. So it kind of is
Yeah.
a self-defeating process that people may be undertaking.
Yeah, I think yeah, this concept of agency and then autonomy kind of go hand in hand, and both are things that we have to continue to pay attention to, especially now with AI. Like, let's make sure we're not losing the agency and the autonomy
Yeah.
in the school place, in the workplace, like in all these spaces of our lives, because yeah, it could go badly very quickly if we start.
Have you seen the movie Idiocracy?
No.
You should take a look at it. I
What
think
is
it's from
it?
2006 or something. Idiocracy. It's
No.
it's a what would you even call such a movie? It's speculative fiction.
It's a fiction. It's a okay. I'm gonna have
Yes,
to
it's
look. I'm
speculative
gonna
fiction, but it's a parody really, and
okay.
it's set about 500 or something years in the future, where
Mm,
an average Joe is put into just sleep, right, for 500 years, and average Joe wakes up, and average Joe is now the most intelligent person on earth.
wow.
Why? Because intelligence just spirals down, and their reasoning in the movie was
Oh
some
no.
mechanisms I don't. But we could literally be
The
soft
society went
pedaling our
down.
way.
Oh my
Yeah,
God.
if
Yeah.
people can't spell and people can't write, then how do you conduct anything in society based on this, right? And we lose institutional memory. Doctors in 500 years in this movie, listen, they don't even know how to type. They have two buttons they have to push.
Oh my gosh.
It's such an
Okay, I'm
interesting
watching
movie.
this. I'm
Funny, but
watching.
yeah.
Oh my gosh. I'm gonna have to watch this because that yeah, we may be headed that way. No, I feel like the people that I've talked to, they're very much optimistic about like how we can use it as a tool, right? Rather than like to the demise of our society. And I'm
Yeah.
also not like super against AI and super pro. Like I think yeah, a middle ground is good. We use it as a tool. So
Yes.
I'm becoming more optimistic the more I talk to people like you, people like Mike, but like I tend to be a little bit more pessimistic than all of you.
Then
So
optimistic.
you're bringing me more toward the middle. So I just wanted to quickly get into the spirituality chatbot because I saw that you had a paper
Yeah.
about building a chatbot and talking to people about spirituality. Like, what are you learning on that side of humanity?
So this study was actually in 2020, 2021.
Okay.
So this is COVID, actually, yeah, COVID era.
Okay.
And we gathered the data on chatbots. And as you can imagine, chatbots by that time were not anywhere near the sophistication we have today. So people
Yeah.
were really aware of the limits of what chatbots could do. And our real curiosity was on, well, what first of all, what do people think about the role of chatbots in this intimate setting of spirituality? And then what could be envisioned with these group of people? Um, and I think it's interesting now that chatbots are super advanced in a way that we anthropomorphize them in a way that we didn't before. What happens to the comments people made, right? So we probably need to revisit the study and see what
Yeah.
changes in light of recent developments.
Yeah.
Um, but human touch was a central theme. People consistently said across religions, right? We had Christians, Muslims, Jews, I believe, and even the pagan in there. So across Hindus, right, Buddhists, yeah, across religions, human touch. People would say, well, the chatbot can do most things, but can it slide its hand across and just touch my hand? And if you think about spirituality and intimate human connection, that's important. Sometimes it's not the words, right? Um, and I don't think that will ever change, which again goes back to what I said about the promises of these technologies. Sometimes we need to settle back and say, hey, no, it's not going to change. There's certain eternals, I like to call them, right? Um, and then there was this notion of uh, relationship, right? So you want to have a sustained relationship with your priest or with the one that you're studying the Bible with. Sometimes, a new perspective is nice, but you go in there. You asked about trust, right? Trust being an important aspect in these intimate spaces. The way we conceptualize trust was that trust is a trade-off. So trust is when you accept vulnerability, but because you can expect positive things from another. If these two things are not met, there's no trust. So, well, how does trust emerge? There's some kind of relationship. So then the question is, can you have a sustained relationship with a chatbot over time and people do that, right? These days,
Yeah.
and I don't know if we're ever going to hit a limit based on context capacities, but a human being has very little limit there, right? Like there's a shared context that persists over time. So we don't really have to worry as much about that component. Um, Responsibility was another big component. Something along I remember this, I don't remember if we actually included this in the paper or not, but a few Catholics said something along the lines that they would be more comfortable to confess to a chatbot than to a priest
Mm.
because they would feel embarrassed, for example, with a priest. But if you interpret that, it really boils down to, well, the priest can hold you accountable, the chatbot
Mm.
can't, right? And so now the question is, as designers, are we designing away accountability? And the answer is yes, if you don't include a human in some capacity. And then what does that mean? Is that really what we want to design for? I would say no, you don't want to design away accountability. That's such a
Yeah.
core human value, right? Uh, so yeah, and I think I'm actually now really curious if there are any studies now looking at
Yeah.
chatbots for intimate relationships. I know there's a lot of people using it for therapy, um, but
Yeah.
religious, intimate kind of spaces might be a good idea to just follow up on this research.
Yeah, it'll be super interesting because I wonder if yeah, if their thinking has changed and I wonder if now that like you said, maybe the few Catholics that said that maybe they would be more likely to use it for things like confessions might have a different viewpoint now, where it's like you could type your confession into like a chat bot, but the feeling that you have and when you talk to a priest to let go of that shame or whatever you're holding in that you're confessing about, right? Like it's not going to go away if you
Yeah,
just type it into ChatGPT like I did
right.
this. Like
Right.
so I even so that accountability is part of it, but like so someone not holding you accountable, but like also the internal feelings like you're not releasing that information. You might I don't know if they
Mm.
feel better about themselves if they confess on a chatbot, but it seems to me that that is another limitation of like
Yeah,
technology. Like typing it in
that's a
might not
good
make
point.
you feel better. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I'm really fascinated by this. Might return to it. There's also the privacy element. It's like, okay, if I told the
Right.
priest, it's just to the priest. But now ChatGPT has this somewhere, even though they say what am I
Yeah,
okay
the
with that? My
privacy. Yeah.
confessions. So
Yeah.
that's interesting.
That's a whole
Yeah, we
nother
might
can of
actually
worms.
revisit.
The data that these
Absolutely.
companies have on us, that's where the real money is, and people think that it's private. It's not really private. That policy data issues is a whole nother can of worms, but we
Right.
don't have time to get into that now. But okay, so these last four questions are just rapid fire, whatever comes to
Mm.
mind. What do you think are the most important skills students need to thrive in today's job market?
Independent thought and creativity. I would say those two. Um,
Okay.
Things are shifting, quote unquote, whether it's perceived or real, but you need to be adaptable
Mm,
or adaptive. Um, so I would say independent thought, creativity, and then of course I have to add entrepreneurialism, right? So you need to be able to start identify opportunities and move people to start things or you start things. I think
yeah,
those three skills will keep anyone
you would be
useful.
solid. Yeah. I
Yeah.
think I put it in the notes that I sent to you, but I saw a study where like there's a ton more students considering entrepreneurship, starting their own business, looking at gig work, exploring freelance. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's gonna become a big skill, I think, for these recent graduates or upcoming graduates. So I think you're
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, okay, so what is one idea or resource that shaped how you think about the future of work?
I think socio-technical gap. I think it's very basic. It's fundamental. We've seen it work, and as long as you introduce technology into any kind of social system, understanding the gap helps. It will
Yeah.
demystify hype, but it will also give you a lens to identify opportunities, hidden costs. So you're not trading off the wrong things, right? So socio-technical gap by Ackerman, I think is a core concept that um, I like to use when I'm thinking through any tech infused work or learning or whatever situation.
Yeah, that's a great one. I think it's super important in today's time period and with everything changing with AI. Okay, what is the best piece of career advice that you've ever received?
Try to align your desires with the needs of society and leverage the assets you have. So
Mm,
D for desires, needs for N, assets A, leverage your DNA. That's like I share
wow.
that with almost everyone.
Oh my gosh, I love it. DNA.
Yeah.
That's a great piece of advice there. And then lastly, is there a question that nobody ever asked you that you wish they would?
What am I missing? I think that's the question I want more people to ask. What am I
Yeah.
missing?
What am I missing?
Um, yeah, what is missing here? And it's a difficult question to answer because you have to account for what you're not seeing. Uh, but I'll think more about that question, and
Yeah,
then perhaps I'll ask people to ask me that question.
exactly. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
Well, this has been super fun. I appreciate you taking the time. And it's just a lot to think on, I think. There's a lot to think
Yes, yeah, and yeah, it's kind of jiggered my thinking a lot on.
on.
It's actually
Yeah.
got me thinking quite a bit. I have some really interesting ideas just based on what we discussed. Um, so
Nice.
yeah, if the opportunity comes up to have this again, I'm super, super excited to do it because yeah, it's like lots
Absolutely.
of things to think about.